Hello, Joe Simhart here again for another edition of my podcast on cults in the occult culture. And it's August. I haven't done one of these in a little while, but recently I reread this book by Shiva Naipaul, Journey to Nowhere. And it came out around 1980. This edition published in 1981. And it's subtitled A New World Tragedy, and it also says it's a tough, intelligent, beautifully written account of how California and third world illusions fused to set the stage for the disaster in Guyana. And that was from The Nation. Of course, Naipaul is writing about Jonestown, the cult founded by Jim Jones. Its formal name was the People's Temple. And he covers its background quite well. There's a few missing parts, but the book is excellent. He's a great writer. I'd recommend reading it if you are looking into that infamous cult. In fact, that incident of people getting murdered and committing suicide in Guyana in 1978 practically defined cult for the times and set up alarm bells about any group that was acting extremist or communal or radically new or whatever. But the times then are very similar to the times now in some ways, with a lot of division between left and right. So I want to read something that Naipaul wrote here regarding the conditions of the times, not just about the cult, but about the context, the matrix in which it grew. I mean, Jones, for instance, wasn't just a Christian preacher. In fact, he denied Christianity in the end. He became a full-on communist. He believed in reincarnation. He believed that he was Akhenaten in a past life and that his wife was Nefertiti. He was a mixed bag. He also claimed to have magical powers, which translated as faith healing in his church services. A lot of magic tricks were used in order to convince his audience that he had healing powers. So I'm going to read here on page 261. He's quoting a professor. Some people think of the 60s in Berkeley as an exhilarating time, an elderly professor said to me. I'm afraid it is an opinion I cannot share. For me, it was a deplorable period, really quite deplorable. He recalled how the rebels would march through buildings, breaking windows, setting fires. Quote, it wasn't socialism they were cerebrating upon. Most of them didn't know what socialism was. They merely wanted to destroy whatever was in existence, unquote, he laughed. Trying to understand it was like trying to understand why epidemics broke out. What did they used to say? If you weren't part of the solution, you were part of the problem. I guess I was part of the problem. Anyone in any position of authority was part of the problem. It was a deplorable and distressing, not at all exhilarating. Hysteria had bred hysteria. Student extremism was often matched by the extremism of faculty and administration. I was really surprised by the irrationality of a lot of people under pressure, Clark Kerr, former president of the university, said to me. I was shocked by the behavior of some people I had really respected and thought had good judgment. Americans, he had decided, felt more threatened by Freud than by Marx. The development at Berkeley that had most outraged the California public was the filthy speech movement. In other words, they started using words like fuck and shit and all that kind of stuff in the so-called speech movement. He had had more letters and phone calls about that than about anything else. That one four-letter word, the F word, had aroused a much more violent response than any of the radical rhetoric that had been pouring out of the campus. The Board of Regents, the body that oversees the running of the entire University of California, had held a special meeting to discuss the filthy speech movement. It had become a stormy affair. One of the board members, Kerr said, got up there in the room, his face red. Do you know what that word was? He shouted and then yelled it at the top of his voice. It was much more obscene than this deranged kid holding a sign. It started out by some kid with the F word on a sign on campus protesting. One of the regents would have been Catherine Hearst, wife of Randolph Hearst, mother of Patricia Hearst, notorious for her conservatism. A decade later, her daughter, Patricia, would be seized by the Symbionese Liberation Army, a remnant of the Berkeley 60s, and be transformed into Tanya, the people's warrior and bank-robbing revolutionary feminist whose liberated speech crackled with four-letter words. By 1965, according to Kerr, both the left and the right wing had gone, quote, absolutely crazy, unquote. The left wing saw in a confused student revolt a revolution that was going to transform not only the university, but American society. The right wing behaved as if it would soon be fighting on the barricades. So, fighting on the barricades. So what did we see here? We saw fighting on the barricades and the insurrection. I mean, a part of the right wing has gone crazy like they did back in 1960s. I think Naipaul has a lot to say to us in many ways. This book reminded me that this problem of division between right and left has been going on for about 100 years, and some of it's been stimulated by the rise of modernism, where science and religion has challenged beliefs that people have held or think they held. And so fundamentalism and that side of society rose to fight that kind of modernism back in the 1920s, and it has accelerated. A lot of the narratives have been defined by talking heads on both sides, and as a result, people have been locked into basic assumption states, which they don't even care to defend. They just keep shouting out their points of view. Tough times. And I think that Reed and the title, Reed of Journey to Nowhere, tells us a lot about what can happen if extremism on both sides continues to dominate the discussion. Anyway, thank you for listening.